The Galactic Council's fatal decision. The Galactic Council was the most powerful organization in the known universe. It controlled hundreds of planets, ruled over countless species, and had the most advanced military ever created. For centuries, no one dared to challenge its authority. When the Council made a decision, it was final. And now, it had made a decision about Earth. Humans had always been seen as a minor species, primitive, reckless, and unworthy of a seat among the stars. When humanity discovered space travel and started expanding beyond their solar system, the Council saw it as an annoyance rather than a threat. At first, they ignored humans, but then something changed. Reports began to surface, strange, unbelievable reports. Human soldiers had fought off pirate attacks that should have wiped them out. Human engineers had repaired ancient alien technology in ways no one understood. Human traders had outsmarted entire star systems in business deals. Most troubling of all, humans did not bow to the Council's authority. Unlike other species, they did not accept the Council's rule. They refused to pay tribute, refused to follow the laws forced upon other planets. They declared themselves independent. This was unacceptable. At a massive council meeting, representatives of dozens of species gathered to discuss the Earth problem. The debate was short. The conclusion was simple. Humanity would be wiped out. The Council's supreme commander, Lord Veldros, stood before the assembly. His voice was cold and confident. "Humans believe they can defy us," he said. "They are mistaken. We will send a fleet to Earth and crush their resistance. The war will be over in days." The decision was made. The Council's military, the largest in the galaxy, was mobilized. Hundreds of warships, carrying thousands of elite soldiers, prepared to invade Earth. The Council expected an easy victory. They would soon realize how wrong they were. The invasion begins. The invasion fleet arrived in Earth's orbit 3 days later. Giant warships hovered over the planet, their massive cannons aimed at human cities. Alien soldiers, heavily armed and covered in battle armor, prepared to land. The Council's forces had invaded countless planets before. This was nothing new. They sent a message to Earth. "Human leaders, surrender now. Your planet is surrounded. Resistance is useless." For a long moment, there was no response. Then, Earth's reply arrived. It was a single sentence. "You have made a mistake." The Council laughed. Humans were foolish. They would be crushed. The order was given. The invasion began. Troop transports descended from the sky, landing in human cities. Soldiers marched into streets, expecting to face weak resistance. Their scanners detected no armies, no war machines, no sign of an organized defense. It was too easy. And then, without warning, everything went wrong. The trap. The moment the first alien soldier stepped onto human soil, the invasion became a nightmare. The ships hovering in the sky, powerful, unstoppable warships, started disappearing. One by one, they vanished from radar. The captain screamed over communication channels. "Something is wrong. We're losing ships." But it was already too late. On the ground, alien soldiers marched through empty streets. The cities were silent, abandoned. No human civilians. No enemy soldiers. Then, explosions erupted beneath their feet. The ground collapsed. Buildings crumbled. Streets cracked open. The aliens screamed as they fell into underground traps. Hidden tunnels filled with fire, steel, and death. Human forces emerged from nowhere. They didn't fight like any army the aliens had faced before. They didn't march in formation. They didn't use standard tactics. They hunted. Human snipers picked off officers one by one. Soldiers attacked from the shadows, using stealth and ambushes to wipe out entire battalions. Advanced EMP devices shut down alien armor and weapons, leaving them defenseless. Panic spread through the invading forces. "This is impossible." An alien commander screamed. "Where is their army?" The answer was terrifying. The entire planet was their army. Earth had spent years preparing for this invasion. They had studied their enemy. They had developed weapons designed to exploit alien weaknesses. They had turned their cities into death traps. The invaders weren't fighting an army. They were fighting an entire world that refused to die. The first defeat. Lord Veldros watched from his command ship in horror. His forces were being slaughtered. Entire regiments had disappeared. His warships were losing control. "How is this happening?" he whispered. "We are the strongest power in the galaxy." Then, a new message arrived from Earth. It was a live video feed. On the screen, captured alien generals, high-ranking officers of the Council's army, were shown in chains. Their faces were covered in blood and dirt. A human general stood before them, his expression calm. "You thought this would be easy," the human said. "You thought Earth would surrender." He leaned closer to the camera. His voice turned deadly. "You were wrong." The broadcast ended. And for the first time in history, the Galactic Council realized something terrifying. They had underestimated humanity. And now, Earth was coming for revenge. The silent massacre. The Galactic Council had never faced anything like this before. In all their history of conquest, in all their battles against weaker civilizations, they had never seen an enemy fight like the humans. Now, their grand fleet, the most powerful force in the galaxy, was being wiped out. But no one could explain how. The moment the invasion began, things started disappearing. Entire warships, gone. Their massive capital ships, bristling with weapons and shields strong enough to withstand planetary bombardment, vanished from existence without a single explosion. 1 second, they were there. The next, they were simply gone. On the ground, alien commanders watched in horror as their armies were picked apart piece by piece. At first, they assumed it was a communications error, but soon they realized the truth. Their forces were being slaughtered in total silence. No alarms, no screams, just silence. The vanishing fleet. Admiral Selvar of the Council's fleet stood on the bridge of his command ship, eyes wide with disbelief. His holographic display showed dozens of red markers disappearing from the map, each one representing a battleship or a troop carrier. "Where are they going?" one of his officers shouted. "Are they retreating?" "No," Selvar whispered, gripping the edge of his command table. "They're just disappearing." Then his own ship's lights flickered. The screens turned to static. A deep, unnatural hum filled the air, and for a brief moment, everything felt wrong. And then, darkness. Admiral Selvar felt weightless. His body trembled as he realized that he was no longer standing on solid ground. The ship was gone. Everything around him was gone. He wasn't floating in space. He wasn't falling. He was nowhere. And then, he was dead. The trapped soldiers. On the ground, alien troops tried to regroup. They were elite warriors, trained in every form of combat, equipped with advanced energy weapons and personal force fields. None of it mattered. They found themselves trapped in the ruins of human cities, unable to move forward, unable to retreat. At first, they thought it was human defenses, hidden barricades, energy barriers, or some kind of jamming field. But then, they noticed something far worse. Time was moving differently here. A group of alien soldiers sprinted down an empty street. When they reached the end of the road, they found themselves back where they started. They tried again. And again. Every time, they ended up back in the same place, as if reality itself was looping around them. What is this?" one of them stammered. Their commander ordered them to use their communicators. No response. The signals were being scrambled. Then one of the soldiers screamed. The others turned just in time to see his body turning to dust, as if he had aged thousands of years in an instant. One by one, they started falling. Their skin cracked. Their bones crumbled. They weren't being attacked. They were being erased. The unseen enemy. The remaining alien forces tried to retreat. They ran back to their dropships, only to find them missing. The massive transport vessels, which had landed thousands of troops, were simply gone. No wreckage, no sign of battle. Just emptiness. Panic spread. Soldiers abandoned their weapons, screaming in terror as they realized they were completely alone. And then the humans appeared. Not an army, not a fleet of war machines. Just one man. A human soldier wearing dark combat armor stood in the middle of the ruined street. His helmet reflected the dim light of the burning buildings. The alien troops raised their weapons, but their guns refused to fire. "Who are you?" one of them demanded, his voice trembling. The human didn't answer. He simply lifted his arm and pressed a single button on his wrist device. Suddenly, the entire alien battalion collapsed. Not shot, not wounded, just gone. The Council's desperate call. In the Galactic Council's capital, panic had set in. The invasion was supposed to be a simple operation, a warning to other species who dared to defy them. But now, the Council's forces were being annihilated without explanation. They couldn't even confirm what was happening, because no one was left to report back. The last transmission they received was from a high-ranking general. "This isn't war," the general's voice trembled. "This is something else. The humans, they know something we don't. They aren't just fighting us." The Council's leaders leaned forward. "Then what are they doing?" The general took a shaky breath. "They're erasing us." The transmission ended. Silence filled the grand hall of the council chamber. For the first time in history, the rulers of the galaxy were afraid. And somewhere on Earth, deep beneath the surface, hidden in a secret facility, a human scientist smiled as he watched the incoming data. "The test was a success," he said, turning to his superior. "Project Nullification is fully operational." The superior officer nodded. "Then let's begin Phase 2. The Galactic Council had come to destroy humanity. Now, humanity would erase them from existence. Earth's secret weapon. The Galactic Council had sent its mightiest fleet to Earth, expecting to crush humanity in a matter of days. Instead, their fleet was vanishing without explanation. Their soldiers were being erased before they could even fire a shot. Now, only silence remained. But deep in the Council's command headquarters, the horror was only beginning. The Council's last transmission. Lord Veldros stood in the Galactic Council's war chamber, surrounded by holographic displays. Each screen once showed the invasion fleet's status, troop movements, and battle projections. Now, they only showed static. The Council's war commanders, once arrogant and overconfident, were now pale and shaking. They had lost complete contact with their forces. "My lord," a tactical officer whispered, "we just received an automated distress signal from the flagship Eternal Dominion." Veldros turned sharply. "Play it." The signal flickered onto the screen. The image was distorted, filled with digital interference. But in the chaos, one thing was clear. The ship's crew was screaming. They weren't screaming in pain. They were screaming in terror. The camera feed shook violently. Lights flickered. Something unnatural moved in the background, a shape that defied logic. Then, a desperate voice broke through the static. "They see us." A long silence. Then, a final whisper. "We are already dead." The screen went black. Veldros felt his blood run cold. The weapon humanity wasn't supposed to have. Far beneath Earth's surface, in a hidden military complex, Dr. Elias Carter watched the incoming data. He was one of the lead scientists behind Project Nullification, a weapon the universe had never seen before, a weapon that should not exist. His assistant, a young scientist named Claire, stared at the readings. This isn't possible," she whispered. "How are they vanishing?" Dr. Carter exhaled slowly. "We didn't destroy them," he said. "We unmade them." Claire's hands trembled. We erased them from reality. Project Nullification was unlike any war machine ever built. It didn't fire bullets. It didn't launch missiles. It rewrote physics itself. It was a weapon that targeted existence. The invading forces were not dying. They were being erased from the timeline. It wasn't teleportation. It wasn't disintegration. It was as if they had never existed at all. Dr. Carter turned to the monitors, watching as more enemy ships disappeared from history itself. Humanity was never meant to have this power, he admitted, but the Council forced our hand. The last survivors of the invasion. Back on the battlefield, a handful of alien soldiers still remained. They had been part of a scouting unit sent to establish forward positions before the main army arrived. Now, the main army was gone, and they were the only survivors. They didn't understand what had happened. One moment, their radios were filled with the voices of commanders and fellow soldiers. The next, silence. Where is everyone? One of them stammered, looking up at the empty sky. The warships were gone. One of them activated his helmet's battlefield scanner, trying to pick up any sign of their missing fleet. Nothing. There were no heat signatures, no movement, no traces of energy trails. It was as if their entire army had never existed in the first place. A single human soldier appeared on the horizon. His armor was black, marked with no insignia, no rank. The last remaining aliens raised their weapons in fear. But the human simply looked at them. His voice came through their comms. Run. The aliens hesitated. Run, the soldier repeated, his voice quiet but filled with something far worse than anger. The aliens turned and flowed into the wilderness, desperate to escape. The human watched them go. Then he pressed a button on his wrist device. The last survivors of the invasion vanished. The Council's desperation. In the Galactic Council's chamber, chaos erupted. This is impossible, one of the counselors shouted. Humanity was a primitive race. How could they possess technology like this? Another leader slammed his fist on the table. We underestimated them. We should have wiped them out years ago. A third voice spoke, this one filled with fear. If they have this weapon, then they could erase us next. Silence fell over the room. For the first time in its history, the Galactic Council realized it was no longer the most powerful force in the galaxy. One of the high-ranking officers turned to Lord Veldros. What do we do? He whispered. Veldros closed his eyes. He had always believed in the Council's strength. He had believed that no species could ever challenge them. Now, he wasn't so sure. He opened his eyes and spoke a single command. We surrender. The word sent a shockwave through the Council. But before anyone could protest, the chamber began to shake. A new transmission appeared on the central display. It was a message from Earth. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a demand for surrender. It was simply a warning. A single sentence. This was only a test. The Galactic Council, once the rulers of the universe, had been reduced to trembling cowards in a single day. They had made a fatal mistake. They had thought humanity was weak. Now, they knew the truth. Humanity was the end. The fall of the invaders. The Galactic Council had never known fear. For thousands of years, they had ruled the galaxy with an iron grip. Their fleets were unmatched, their technology centuries ahead of any other species. They had erased civilizations before, reducing entire planets to dust for disobedience. But now, they had become the hunted. They had sent an armada to Earth, expecting an easy victory. Instead, their fleet had vanished without a trace. Their soldiers had been erased from existence. Their greatest generals had never even had the chance to surrender. Now, there was only silence, and humanity was about to strike back. The Council's frantic retreat. Deep inside the Galactic Council's war chamber, panic filled the air. High-ranking officers, once arrogant and confident, now trembled before the giant holographic screen that displayed the impossible. The entire invasion force was gone, not defeated, not retreating, Just gone. Lord Veldros stood frozen, his mind racing for an answer. Any answer. This wasn't possible. Nothing like this had ever happened before. This cannot be, one of the counselors whispered. His voice shook with terror. The humans. They shouldn't have been able to do this. They have a weapon beyond anything we've ever seen, another voice said. A weapon that doesn't kill, but erases. A cold realization spread across the room. If humans could erase entire armies, then they could erase the council itself. Veldros slammed his fist onto the war table. We must regroup. Recall all forces. Pull every ship back to the homeworld. The Council's elite fleet, thousands of warships stationed across the galaxy, was immediately called back. The counselors thought they could fortify their defenses, prepare for the coming storm. But it was already too late. The storm was already here, the shadows of the battlefield. Across the galaxy, the recall order was transmitted to every council fleet. The message was clear. Return to the homeworld. Prepare for defense. Humanity is coming. But something strange happened. The ships that received the order never responded. At first, the council thought it was a communication failure, but as time passed, they realized entire fleets had gone dark. One by one, their warships simply stopped transmitting. Their locations, unknown. Their fate, unknown. No distress signals, no battles, no wreckage. It was as if they had never existed at all. The last message received from one of their battleships was a single, distorted whisper from the ship's commander. They are already here. Then, silence. And the fleet was never heard from again. The Earth counterattack begins. For the first time in history, humanity was not just defending itself. It was attacking. And no one saw it coming. The Council had expected a brutal war, a struggle where fleets clashed, where planets were bombarded, where entire star systems would burn. But humanity had no intention of fighting their way through enemy territory. Instead, they simply removed the enemy from existence. It started slowly, with isolated ships disappearing one by one. Then, entire starbases went dark, their crews never seen again. Then, entire planets stopped responding. The Council's outer defenses, once impenetrable fortresses that had stood for centuries, crumbled without a single shot being fired. And finally, the war reached the homeworld. The fall of the Council's homeworld. The Council homeworld, Wildcard Prime, was the most heavily fortified planet in the galaxy. Massive orbital defense stations surrounded the planet. A fleet of 10,000 warships patrolled the system, ready to obliterate anything that dared approach. But their defenses meant nothing, because the enemy they faced was beyond their understanding. It began with a whisper on the comms channels. One of the fleet commanders reported seeing something moving between the stars, just beyond their sensors, something that shouldn't be there. Then the sensors glitched. At first, the fleet captains thought it was a minor malfunction, but then their navigation systems stopped working. Then their shields powered down. Then their weapons locked up. Then, one by one, the warships began disappearing. On the surface of Wildcard Prime, the counselors watched in horror as their mighty fleet vanished into nothingness, leaving the planet completely defenseless. Then, the skies darkened. Massive clouds formed, but there was no wind, no storm, no rain. Just an eerie, unnatural darkness that spread across the sky like ink dissolving in water. Then, the human spoke. A voice, calm, emotionless, echoed across the entire planet. We told you to leave us alone. You didn't listen. Now, there will be nothing left of you. Then, the world began to collapse. Buildings crumbled into dust. Entire cities vanished from existence. The ground itself split apart as reality itself seemed to be unraveling. The counselors tried to flee. There was nowhere to run. Their last moments were spent in absolute terror, realizing that they had brought this upon themselves. And then, they were gone. Wildcard Prime vanished from the galaxy. The planet, The heart of the Galactic Council, the center of power for thousands of years, was erased as if it had never existed. The galaxy after the fall. When the dust settled, the Galactic Council was no more. No one knew what had happened. No one could explain it. The most powerful empire in the galaxy had simply ceased to be. Other alien civilizations, once terrified of the Council, now looked to Earth with newfound fear. If humanity could erase the most powerful force in the universe, what could they do to the rest of them? Across the stars, whispers spread. Some feared that humanity would now rule with an iron fist, that they would become the next great tyrants. But others believed something else. Humanity hadn't fought for power. They had fought for survival. And now, they had sent a message to the galaxy, one that no one would ever forget. A simple, chilling message. Do not test us again. The broadcast that shakes the galaxy. The Galactic Council was gone. Its fleets had vanished. Its homeworld had been erased. Its rulers had ceased to exist. Across the galaxy, no one understood what had happened. One day, the Council was the most powerful force in existence, feared, unquestioned, eternal. The next, it was a ghost. No wreckage, no survivors, no explanations. Just emptiness. The empires that once served the Council, the Dravani Dominion, the Telfar Enclave, the Varkonian warlords, were left leaderless and afraid. Their fleets remained intact, their armies were still strong, but their will to fight had been shattered, because they had seen the impossible. A minor species, one that the Council had dismissed as primitive, had erased their masters from existence. Now the question spread across the stars. Who is next? The first signs of the collapse. With the Council's disappearance, chaos erupted. For thousands of years, every major civilization in the galaxy had followed the Council's laws, whether by choice or by force. Their trade routes, their diplomatic alliances, their very way of life, all were structured around the Council's control. But now, there was no control. Governments collapsed overnight. Civil wars broke out. Pirate fleets, once hunted by the Council's warships, began carving out their own territories. On the planet Tristivar, once a jewel of the Council's empire, entire cities burned as rival factions fought for dominance. On Selfar Prime, the ruling elites turned against each other, blaming one another for the Council's fall. On Drachma VI, a massive slave rebellion erupted. For the first time in centuries, the oppressed had a chance to rise. It was a power vacuum unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And in the middle of it all, one name was whispered with both fear and awe. Humanity. The broadcast that changed everything. Then it happened. A single transmission. It was broadcast across the galaxy, on every frequency, on every communication network. A simple message, originating from Earth. A human appeared on the screen. He was dressed in a plain military uniform. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something cold, something that sent a chill through everyone watching. He spoke slowly, clearly. Your rulers are gone. They came to destroy us. They thought they were gods. He leaned forward. We proved them wrong. Silence. Then the image changed. Captured alien generals, those who had survived the war, appeared on screen. They were bound, broken, their eyes filled with terror. A voiceover began. These are the last of the Council's leaders. Watch them carefully. For soon, they too will be nothing but dust. The screen flickered, and in real time, the captured Council generals vanished. Not executed, not tortured. They were simply erased. The message was clear. This was not a war anymore. This was a lesson. Then the human commander spoke one last time. Earth does not seek war. But if you come for us. He stared into the camera, his voice dropping to a whisper. We will end you. The broadcast ended. The galaxy's reaction. For the first time in history, the entire galaxy stood still. Leaders of alien civilizations sat in stunned silence, their blood running cold. There was no boasting, no threats of retaliation. There was only fear. On the war-torn planet of Arconia, the ruling warlords, once the most brutal conquerors in the galaxy, held an emergency meeting. The first words spoken were simple: "We must never cross the humans." In the shattered halls of the Dravani Dominion, the Supreme Chancellor stared at his advisors. His voice shook. "We have two choices," he said. "We submit to Earth, or we wait for our turn to disappear." On the outer rim of the galaxy, in the lawless territories where pirate lords ruled, a single message was sent out across the void. A plea: "Earth, we surrender." Even those who had never known fear before, those who had spent their lives conquering, enslaving, and ruling, now saw the new reality. There was a new power in the galaxy, and it did not rule with diplomacy. It ruled with silence, the final warning. Back on Earth, humanity's leaders watched as the galaxy reacted in terror. The war was over. They had won. But they did not celebrate, because they knew the truth. Humanity had unlocked something unnatural, a weapon that defied the laws of existence. And once a weapon like that is created, it can never be undone. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in a hidden research facility, Dr. Elias Carter stood before the nullification device. It was silent, its energy core dim, dormant. For now. Claire, his assistant, spoke softly. "We should destroy it." Dr. Carter didn't look at her. "We can't." She swallowed. "What if someone else learns how to build one?" Dr. Carter sighed. "Then this galaxy won't survive." A long silence. Then she whispered the question that no one wanted to ask. "Did we become the monsters?" Dr. Carter closed his eyes. He didn't answer. Because deep down, he already knew. Humanity's counterattack begins. The Galactic Council was gone. Their empire erased. Their fleets vanished. Their rule reduced to a whispered memory in the void. But the war was not over. Because while Earth had shattered the Council, its allies still remained. The Dravani Dominion, the HFY Enclave, the Varkonian warlords. Each of these factions had once served the Council loyally, feeding off its power, enforcing its will, and leading the campaign against Earth. Now, they stood leaderless, desperate, divided, vulnerable. Some were ready to surrender. Some were ready to flee to the furthest reaches of space. And some were ready to fight to the bitter end. Humanity would not give them the chance. The counterattack had begun. The Earth fleet moves. For the first time in history, a human war fleet left the solar system. Not to defend, not to negotiate, but to eradicate the last remnants of the old order. The fleet was small, only a fraction of what the Council's forces had once been. But it didn't need to be large, because humanity had already proven that size didn't matter anymore. They had a weapon the galaxy didn't understand, and that weapon moved with them. The Dravani's final stand. The Dravani Dominion was the first target. A brutal, reptilian species, the Dravani had served as the enforcers of the Council's rule. They were the ones who had raided human colonies. They were the ones who had burned cities, stolen children, enslaved survivors. They were the ones who had laughed when Earth was marked for destruction. Now, there was nothing left to laugh about. Their fleet, once 1,000 warships strong, was down to barely 200. Their supply lines were cut off. Their worlds were in chaos, and humanity was coming. Admiral Voktar, the last high commander of the Dravanid forces, stood on the bridge of his flagship Dominator's Wrath, staring at the incoming human fleet. His second-in-command trembled beside him. "We should surrender," the officer whispered. Voktar snarled. "You saw what they did to the Council. Surrender is not an option." He turned to his officers. "We fight." He didn't say it with confidence. He said it because he had no other choice. The first strike. The Dravani fleet formed a defensive line, their massive warships aligning in perfect formation. The plan was simple: overwhelm the human fleet before they could use their nullification technology. It was a desperate strategy, but desperation was all they had left. The order was given. Fire. Hundreds of plasma cannons ignited, sending a storm of energy toward the human ships. The fleet commander of Earth, Admiral Ethan Drake, watched the incoming firestorm. He didn't flinch. He didn't order evasive maneuvers. He simply pressed a single button. And reality shifted. The energy blasts, capable of reducing entire cities to ash, vanished mid-flight. The Dravani officers froze. Where did? Before they could finish the question, their own ships began to disappear. Not explode, not burn, just gone. One by one, the Dravani warships vanished into nothingness, and humanity never fired a single shot. The execution. Admiral Vokhtar stood in stunned silence, watching as his entire fleet was erased in front of his eyes. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. The enemy wasn't even fighting them. The humans were just standing there, watching, waiting. And then, a transmission arrived. A human officer appeared on the screen. Admiral Ethan Drake. His voice was cold, emotionless. "You should have left us alone." Vokhtar felt something he had never felt before. Terror. True, absolute, paralyzing terror. The connection cut. And then, his ship vanished. The HFY Enclave's submission. By the time Earth's fleet arrived at the HFY homeworld, the ruling council of the Enclave had already made their decision. They would not fight. They had seen what had happened to the Dravani. They had seen what had happened to the council. And they knew one simple truth. There was no war to be won. The HFY's Supreme Chancellor stood before the Planetary Council, trembling as he activated a galactic-wide transmission. His voice broke as he spoke. "We surrender. To Earth and to its people, we offer our complete loyalty." He took a shuddering breath. "Please, spare us." And then he fell to his knees. Across the galaxy, the transmission was received by every major civilization. Some saw it as cowardice. Some saw it as wisdom. Some saw it as the inevitable. But all of them knew one thing. The galaxy had a new ruler. The Varkonian Rebellion. The last to fall were the Varkonian warlords. Unlike the others, they did not surrender. They had no loyalty to the council, no laws, no alliances. They lived for war and conquest. They would fight to the last breath. Or so they thought. When the human fleet arrived in Varkonian space, the warlords did not hesitate. They launched their attack, 10,000 warships rushing to meet the enemy. And then, they disappeared. Not all at once. One by one. The warlords screamed in defiance. They refused to beg. But it didn't matter. Because soon, there were none left to beg at all. And with their fall, the last remnant of the old empire was erased. The war was over. Humanity had won. The new order begins. The galaxy stood in silent obedience. No more wars. No more rebellions. No more defiance. Because the only alternative was non-existence. Humanity had rewritten the laws of power. Where once the strong ruled by force, by conquest, by war. Now power belonged to those who could erase history itself, and Earth held absolute control. For the first time in history, the galaxy belonged to humans. And deep beneath Earth's surface, in a hidden chamber, Dr. Elias Carter stared at the nullification device. The greatest weapon ever built. A weapon that had made humanity unstoppable. A weapon that could never be destroyed. Because the moment anyone tried to destroy it, it would erase them first. Dr. Carter took a deep breath and whispered the truth that no one wanted to hear. We should have never built this. The Galactic Council's final decision. The war was over. The Galactic Council, once the supreme rulers of the universe, no longer existed. Their fleets had been erased, their armies wiped from history, their homeworld removed from the stars. The Dravani Dominion, erased. The HFY enclave, surrendered. The Varkonian warlords, obliterated. There was no resistance left. But there was one final question. What would humanity do next? Would they rule the galaxy? Would they erase every alien species that had once stood against them? Or had they already gone too far? Because while the war had ended, something far worse was about to begin. The price of victory. The galaxy had fallen silent. Planets that once bustled with trade and communication now operated in hushed whispers. Governments that once threatened humanity now feared even speaking Earth's name. Every species had seen what happened to those who defied humans. They had seen entire civilizations vanish, not destroyed, not conquered, just gone. Some alien leaders begged to become Earth's subjects. Others hid in the furthest reaches of space, hoping to be forgotten. But no one dared fight, because they knew, if Earth wanted to, it could erase them all. The last council. But not everyone accepted this fate. In the deepest shadows of the galaxy, hidden far beyond the reaches of known space, a secret meeting was held. A meeting of the last surviving leaders of the fallen empires. They had no fleets. They had no armies. They had nothing left, except one thing, a desperate plan. The unthinkable plan. The meeting was held on a hidden moon, orbiting a dying star. Only a handful of leaders remained, former rulers, warlords, scientists, the last survivors of a lost age. Among them was Chancellor Vexri of the Dravani Dominion, the only leader who had escaped before humanity erased his people. His scales, once a bright golden hue, had turned a dull gray from the stress of exile. He stood before the table and spoke the words no one dared to say. "We cannot defeat Earth." A murmur rippled through the room. He continued, "We cannot fight them." More murmurs. Then he leaned forward. "But what if we can erase them instead?" Silence. No one breathed. The idea itself was insanity. To erase humanity. Impossible, wasn't it? And yet, did they have any other choice? The nullification paradox. One of the last remaining scientists, Dr. Relveth of the HFY enclave, stepped forward. His 3 glowing eyes flickered with uncertainty. "We have studied Earth's weapon," he said. "The nullification device. It does not work like any technology we have ever seen. We don't know how it functions. We don't know how they built it. But we believe it has one weakness." Vexri leaned forward. "Explain." Relveth took a deep breath. "It cannot erase itself." Silence. Then murmurs turned to gasps. The greatest weapon in the universe was vulnerable. Because if it was used on itself, it would cease to exist. And if it ceased to exist, everything it had erased might return. The assassination attempt. There was only one way to undo what humanity had done. They needed to infiltrate Earth, to reach the nullification facility, and to use the weapon against itself. It was a suicide mission. It was impossible. But it was their only hope. Meanwhile, on Earth, far beneath the surface of Earth, deep in the most secure military installation ever built, Dr. Elias Carter stood alone. The nullification device hummed softly behind him, pulsing with a faint blue light. It was the most powerful creation in history. And yet, Dr. Carter felt nothing but dread as he looked at it. Claire, his assistant, stepped forward. "It's done." "What is?" Claire swallowed. "The final sequence. The failsafe." Dr. Carter turned sharply. "You activated it." She hesitated. "You told me to." He stared at her. Then, slowly, he whispered, "I never gave that order." The betrayal. Before Claire could react, alarms blared throughout the facility. Intruders detected. Security compromised. Dr. Carter's heart pounded. "No," he whispered. "They're here." The facility's defense drones activated, sweeping the corridors for threats. But before they could fire, They disappeared. Not shot, not destroyed. Just erased. Claire's breath hitched. They have the technology. Dr. Carter's hand shook. No, he said. They have something worse. The infiltration. The last surviving members of the former council had done the unthinkable. They had built a weapon to counter humanity's own. Not a copy. Not a duplicate. Something different. Something that could erase the eraser. And now, they were inside Earth's most secure facility. They were at the core. They were at the nullification device. And they had one chance to end this nightmare. The final decision. Dr. Carter and Claire reached the main control room just in time to see them. Vexry stood before the console, his claws hovering over the activation switch. If I push this button, he hissed, your weapon will erase itself. All that you have erased will return. Dr. Carter's hands clenched into fists. You don't know what you're doing, he said. You'll bring back the council, the warlords, the slavers, every monster we erased. Vexry's reptilian eyes narrowed. And you? He spat. What are you, human? Are you not a monster as well? Silence. Dr. Carter had no answer. Vexry's claws tightened over the button. This is our last chance to undo your crime, he whispered. No one should have this power. Dr. Carter closed his eyes. He had a choice. Let Vexry erase the device and risk bringing back the horrors of the past, or stop him and ensure that humanity's rule remained absolute. The fate of the galaxy hung on a single moment. What would he choose?